Hi everybody, this is Mark E. Bilson, and I want to talk to you about the painful silence of East Tennessee State's coaches in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. It really impressed me the other day, Friday, when Jeremy Pruitt took a stand with his players to a March on Knox rally, is what it was officially called. And spoke with some Tennessee Volunteers football players. Now, I do think, obviously, a lot of the protests and riots that have gone on really all over the world in the wake of Floyd's death have certainly been politicized. But if anything, I heard statements from Trey Smith that I didn't necessarily think were publicized. If you're not familiar, Trey Smith, an outstanding offensive lineman for the Volunteers. He'll probably play in the NFL after this season. And here's Jeremy Pruitt, who I do not think is a terribly articulate man. Watch the Jeremy Pruitt show sometime and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But nevertheless, he walked with his players to the stage. He presented a statement, which I thought was pretty decent. Not overly political, a statement of unity. And I thought it really made a statement, and I thought it made Pruitt look pretty good and pro-player. And let's face facts, Pruitt is the guy who grabbed Jarrett Guarantano's face mask last year. So, this is a big step in the right direction, in my opinion, for Jeremy Pruitt and the Tennessee Volunteers, all things considered. It shows an awareness of the times. Unfortunately, and I do understand that the Tennessee football players are on campus, so they can attend such a rally. The ETSU athletes are not on campus. But that doesn't mean that the coaches of the Buccaneers, be they of a major sport like basketball or a minor sport for that matter, can't go on ETSUBucks.com and make a statement of their own in these times. Yes, I do know that Brian Nolan, the president of the university, and athletic director Scott Carter have both made statements. And in the case of Carter, I was actually impressed. He invited people, hey, if you'd like to talk to me about what's going on in the world right now, I'm here to listen. Here's my email. Here's my phone number. I thought it was great. However, the fact that the administration makes the statements and not, shall I say, for lack of a better term, field personnel, the coaches, the people that probably deal with a higher concentration of African Americans on ETSU's campus than anybody, you know what? I didn't think that looked very good, that Randy Sanders, Jason Shea, and Brittany Ezell, let alone the other coaches at ETSU, have not made any public statements to my knowledge. And I'm not the only one. Allie Wirtz, who you may remember was a tight end on the 2018 Buccaneers football team, the one that won the SoCon title, has actually tweeted out, I wish Travis Trickett or Randy Sanders, his former football coach, would say something about BLM, I'm a tweak. Trickett, by the way, is one of his former coaches. Remember, Wirtz transferred in from Georgia State, but obviously so is Sanders, the head coach of the Buccaneers. And I wonder why there hasn't been a statement. I do think that there probably is a bit of fear. I have a bit of fear right now as I talk to you right now because I've got all sorts of opinions here. But after Grant Napier tweeted out All Lives Matter, every single one, and lost both his job as a sports talk show host and as a longtime play-by-play broadcaster of the Sacramento Kings, I do think some people are afraid of saying the politically incorrect thing at this time. I don't think All Lives Matter is a statement on its own that anyone in their right mind could disagree with. However, when it is politicized, as it has been, it is perceived to be mocking the Black Lives Matter movement. I think you could say that in a personal conversation. Obviously, this is a one-sided conversation right now. But if I'm talking to you, I think such a statement acceptable. Unfortunately, as it's always said, Twitter is a cesspool. And you're trying to one-up somebody there. And so you say something that is fairly innocuous, if said possibly in the ranks of discussion, now it isn't discussion. It's, I'm trying to one-up you. And although I don't think Napier should have been fired, I really don't, and I hope he'll find work as a sportscaster elsewhere, he was, and I do think that people see that in other instances, and they're afraid to speak up of what their feelings are. Now, that being said, the coaches do have a filter. They have their bosses. And so if they say, what about this statement? And for that matter, an entire sports information department. Well, you know what? This could be viewed as politically incorrect. Maybe we should say this instead. I think that would be the way to handle some things. A statement is not a tweet. A statement is not trying to one-up something. A statement is trying to show that you're aware of what's going on in the world and the needs, really, of all your players. And the fact of the matter is, at ETSU, and for that matter, East Tennessee, the standards of race are, I think, have kind of gone backwards over the course of time. I'm going to take you back 200 years. The Mansummission Intelligencer, you know what it was? It was the very first abolitionist newspaper, and it was printed for the very first time in Jonesboro, Tennessee. First few issues were printed in Jonesboro, which is 7 miles outside of Johnson City, which is where ETSU is, of course. Natives, if you're watching from out of the area, that's why I'm telling you this. The publisher died, and the paper was picked up and printed in Greenville, Tennessee, which is about 23 miles south, I believe, of Johnson City. So what, it would be 16 miles south of Jonesboro? I guess it depends on how the roads go there, Plenty of ways to go to Greenville from Jonesboro and such. I know, I've taken the road. But that's something to be really proud of. Hey, Jonesboro, Tennessee, first abolitionist newspaper. Is there a celebration, though, of the bicentennial of this? I'm not aware of one. If there is, I hope someone will tell me. But we go there, and then let's go from the 19th century to the 20th century. Does anybody know who David Curtis Stevenson was? Anybody know who that was? David Curtis Stevenson was one of the most prominent members of the Ku Klux Klan in history. Oh, yeah. I mean, right up there with, I don't know, Nathaniel Bedford Forrest or something like that. David Curtis Stevenson he actually was a Klansman in Indiana. He was a convicted murderer and rapist. In fact, a lot of his personal actions are said to have actually made the Ku Klux Klan shrink in numbers, thankfully. People just didn't want to be associated with him. Late in his life, he moved to Jonesboro and started writing for the newspaper there, the Herald and Tribune. How do you go from the first abolitionist newspaper in the 19th century to, in the 20th century, this, infamous Klansman writing for the Herald and Tribune? Would somebody like to explain that one to me? It's not the only one. I mean, Upper East Tennessee, kind of famous, the one part of the South that sided with the Union during the Civil War. It's real easy to figure out why. We've got a lot of mountains here. We don't have any plantations, okay? I mean, too many mountains for a plantation. And there's not enough wealth in this area, probably to this day, for there to be slaveholders. Hence, yeah, let's stick with the Union here. Hey, we're reading the abolitionist newspaper every day, right? So how do you go from that in the early 1860s to the purging of all African American residents in Irwin a half century later? Oh yeah, that happened. And in fact, on my Medium page, I have a link to a man's dissertation of the history of the purge about 20 years into the 20th century of the African Americans from the town of Irwin, Tennessee. Even as late as 1990, this is the last time I checked the census records out, Irwin had a population of 5,015. 5,011 of them were white, 4 were other, none were black. But I think there are some African Americans in Unicoi County now, but I don't have the most recent. But that's what it was in 1990, 20 years after, or 70 years after this quote-unquote black purge in Irwin, Tennessee. So again, these are situations where the community, East Tennessee, going backwards. And those are reasons why it's important for the Jeremy Pruitts, who, by the way, making a statement despite the fact his athletic director, Phil Fulmer, already has, and for that matter, for the ETSU coaches, too, as well. ETSU's history on race is not that great. While Brian Nolan, in a video statement, championed the first 5 African-American students at East Tennessee State back in the 50s, I couldn't help but wonder why it took another decade for Tommy Woods and Johnny Rushaw to play basketball and football for the Buccaneers. It was about 10 years, another decade, before the Buccaneers teams had their first black athletes. Why? I've often gone back. First ETSU sporting event I ever went to, 1986, ETSU beats Davidson, ends the 14-game winless streak. I think the score is 41-16. It's also the first time I ever left a sporting event early. The reason why, the band was impersonating the Ku Klux Klan to celebrate the impending victory. Oh yeah, that happened. How do you go from the first abolitionist newspaper, the Manumission Intelligencer, to that? How do you do that? And for that matter, just 4 years ago, Tristan Retke was going to a Black Lives Matter rally, a rather modest one, wearing a gorilla mask, taunting the people at the rally. Now, if you have, there are criticisms that can be had of Black Lives Matter. Absolutely. You don't display them by going to a rally with a gorilla mask. It's just that simple. And when the coaches at a place like ETSU with that history and this region's history are saying nothing, it just doesn't look good. The Vols themselves don't have the greatest history in the world when it comes to race. 1947, they famously refused to play Duquesne because Duquesne had Chuck Cooper on their roster. Cooper would later become the first black man ever drafted by the NBA. But yeah, forfeit loss, 2-0. Duquesne Dukes, December 23rd, 1947. Go look it up. That's Tennessee's history. But they did something right when Pruitt spoke. He showed at least awareness. And I didn't think he was overly all that political. I thought he was speaking of unity. It's time for the ETSU coaches, when you do consider the history of the area and the school, to do the same. I'm Mark E. Bilson. I ask that you follow me on YouTube, hit the bell, also Medium and Twitter. Until next time.